And happy October, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Movie Pope podcast. And today is the day that we have all been waiting for, our top 5 horror movies of all time. But before we dive in, remember to like, comment, subscribe, and let us know down in the comments what your favorite horror movies are. If you agree or disagree with our choices, I mean, we are open to comments. Doesn't mean we'll always agree with them, but we do welcome your input. Um, and this is actually the first, the first review, I guess, for the month of October with you, your moviness. How you been so far?
Good, good. I would say had quite a challenge coming up with this 5 horror films. So I just want to say that was definitely a fun experience, but it was very hard narrowing down my list to come up with 5. And I know, like we talked before as we were getting prepared for this about the challenges, and I think I probably changed my mind like 5 times
Yeah,
about what I wanted the top 5 to be. And honestly, as we're recording this, I kind of regret the list I came up with. That's not to say that I think any of these movies are bad. It's just trying to narrow down to 5, and there's just so many ways you can look at this. It was a challenge. So
yeah,
it was fun. It was great to be able to watch this stuff. And we're filming this actually. I know it'll come out later, but we're filming this the day after Friday the 13th, which
exactly.
obviously just kind of adds a little bit of oomph to the Halloween time and, kind of with the movies that we're looking at. So I think the timing is fun. It just was, I think, a very challenging ordeal for me. I don't know for you. Maybe you had a different experience, but it was rough going.
Well, it took me quite a while because because you and I both know that the horror genre is ever expansive, and it's no easy feat trying to find the right movie, because there's always going to be one or two movies that make you stop and think, maybe they would have been a much better choice. So I definitely I definitely hear you on that one. In
Yeah,
terms
and I
of my
think the other thing to just really quick with that, I
yeah
think the other thing to bring up too is like the horror genre. It's really hard to define. I think, right? I found that like to be a challenge because like as you go through some of the stuff, like I was kind of surprised to maybe see things that are deemed horror that I don't know if I quite classify it as that. So I think that was the other thing was like it's such a very I think broad category that I was kind of surprised by what some people would consider within that genre. Um,
Yeah, yeah, I totally hear it, because some of my choices wouldn't necessarily fall into that category, but at the same time, it would be very difficult to disprove that they aren't horror films at the same
Correct,
time.
yes. And I think that's kind of why, like when I look at my list, like I think there's 2, possibly 3. Well, I'll say 3, right? I think there's 3 that people would definitely, when they think of horror, these would come to mind. But then in some of the other ones, maybe not as much. But I think it just kind of goes to just how broad that horror genre is and how many things kind of get in there.
Mhm.
One of the ones that I happened to come across just last night as I was still working on this list, one of them that came up that I absolutely love, but I just couldn't really define it as horror was the movie Predator.
Right.
Right? So that was one where I saw Predator. I'm like, oh, and it's like listed as horror. I'm like, oh, dang, like I love Predator. And like I said, that would totally be in my top 5 in my list, but in my brain, like I get why it's kind of considered horror, but in that same token, I just I didn't feel like it really fit into that genre. So I don't know. We say top 5 horror films, but there's probably like a huge asterisk next to that these are like 5 horror films that maybe the masses consider to be deemed horror. I don't know how to work that in, but I did find that to be really interesting. That there's, I think, kind of inconsistency with maybe how some people, one person might look at something as horror, then another person would be like, "That's not really a horror film." So it
Right.
was just a lot of interesting things with this.
Right, and keep in mind too that that this list is just pertinent to us. This is what we think
Correct.
as our
Yes.
top 5. We're not saying these are the top 5 horror films of all time. I mean, we're definitely not in that position to say that.
Well, No, I'm just joking. No, I definitely like even like now when I get into my list, there's like some of them where I'm like, this probably would not normally make it, but I feel like it did enough for the horror genre that it
Yeah.
got me interested in it. So I think yeah, there's just it's an interesting list to put together, but I think we have a lot of fun things to talk about for sure.
Yep. So as I said,
Well, maybe not. I should use fun because some of these things are pretty horrific. But I think they'll be interesting to listen to. Let me rephrase that.
right. Gotcha. So, so as you won the coin toss, you'll go ahead and start us off with your number 5 pick.
Yeah. So, and I think this is the one that I struggle the most with. So I'm gonna go out and strictly say that I find that this film is, I think, more critical to the progression of the horror genre as opposed to anything else. But I do feel like it warrants enough to be on my list. I think there's probably a lot of other films that are kind of like in the horror genre that I would probably like or watch more. But I did want to kind of call this one out. So without further delay, my number 5 is the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre that was done in 1974. And I think with this, one of the things that I always find very interesting is we kind of like look to current films nowadays where we have like people spending hundreds of $1 million on films, right? Between either like all the CGI, the actors, special effects, marketing, all that stuff. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre was made for less than $1 million in today's standards.
Right.
I want you to think of that. With inflation, this movie cost less than $1 million, right? So, probably like 2,000% less than one of the Avatar movies, right? So the how cheap this was, I think, kind of grabs it in, right? So to give people kind of what I liked about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, right? So you kind of open up the film and kind of the cold opening, you see like these dead bodies, and they're like kind of like gooey dead bodies. Like it's just kind of like it's just like hard to kind of stomach and look at. And to think about the time frame this came out in 74, there's probably not been a ton of depictions of stuff like this.
Well, not in fiction. Well, not in fiction anyway. But as opposed to what people were seeing on the news on a regular basis, because Vietnam was still going on, so they're probably seeing pictures of dead bodies all over the place.
Yes. There's probably a little bit of what's the word I'm looking for? People are more desensitized to that. Yeah, there you go. People a little bit more desensitized to that, and I think nowadays we're totally desensitized to it. So I think some of this is looking through in the lens of this came out in 74, because nowadays we see like Hostel and Saw and some of these other things that are just really, really gory and violent, whereas this one's a lot more withdrawn, but still gets the fear part across. So with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, you have a group of 5 people. We got Sally, who's kind of I kind of describe her, she's kind of the final girl, right? She's got a brother, Franklin, who is wheelchair bound. And then you got Jerry, Kim, and Pam, who are pretty much there to be part of the experience, right? In any type of horror film, you always got some people that are there just to die, right? I think the first thing that really stuck out to me is really at the beginning of the movie when they pick up this hitchhiker, right? And when you meet the hitchhiker, it is very awkward, right? The guy's a little bit different, right? Which, kind of does that. And around his neck, right, he's kind of got this, I'm going to describe it as a man purse, or satchel, excuse me. He's wearing a man satchel that's pretty much just made out of a dead animal carcass, right? So immediately, especially like if you're, someone that's not used to seeing that stuff, that's going to come across as very off-putting. It's just someone that's sitting there opening up this dead animal carcass that has stuff in there. And, as the conversation goes on, it really escalates quite quickly, where literally the guy, he takes a knife out of Franklin's hand and he starts to cut himself. Right now, I'm at the stage, and I think these people are absolutely crazy. That guy is out of the van at this stage, right? You pick up this hitchhiker, you have him in your van. When that guy starts cutting himself, that guy's gone. But I love how this group of people, I don't know, maybe the 70s were a little bit different, where, like, it's okay. Like, he's a little bit weird. He's cutting himself, whatever. We'll just kind of continue on. But for me, that guy would be out on the curb so fast if he started cutting himself. But our brilliant group of characters decide, we'll let him stick around. And then he ends up taking a picture, and he tries to pretty much pawn it off to them. It causes him to kind of get agitated when they don't want to buy it. He burns the picture, and then in essence, he lashes out. He takes a knife, and he starts to attack Franklin, right? Which is one of the characters. And at this stage, this is when they decide, oh, well, now that you're attacking one of us, now you need to go. And I just really like that setup, right? It's something simple, but you just get this total sense of unease the whole time this guy's in this car with them. Between cutting himself, the random picture, he just sits there and just burns it because they don't want to buy it. Can you imagine that in this little little Volkswagen bus they're in? Just the guy sitting there burning something, and then he sits there and he starts lashing at one of the characters. It's just totally uneasy from that experience. And eventually when they kick him out, he kind of sits there, he smears blood on the side, but it just was such an uncomfortable experience. And then as you kind of go forward, things really start to escalate. And I think it really comes down to when we have these two characters. You have Kirk and Pam, two of our almost nameless people. They end up going and finding the house where Leatherface is. Now, number one, don't go into people's houses that you're not invited to. I just want to preface that. I guess once again, maybe this is a 70s thing, but these people just kind of just go into people's houses. And I'm like, you know what? Maybe Leatherface wasn't exactly a bad thing. Or like I said, he maybe would be looked a little bit differently nowadays, because if you just have someone come in your house and, you were worried about them attacking you or something, Leatherface might be able to get off if he had a trial nowadays. So that part was really weird. And I just love how when it all happens, it's all so sudden. And it just is something where it comes totally out of left field. That you're just walking through the house, all of a sudden you just see Leatherface pop up. Like I said, Leatherface's mask is kind of, it doesn't age very well, right? It's kind of goofy looking in this. I think in future iterations, they do obviously a much better job with it, because the whole idea is that he's wearing somebody else's face, right?
But it's kind of off-putting too, because because
of
the way that
course.
it looks. I mean,
Yes.
obviously it makes no sense for it to be him literally wearing someone else's face. Is basically like a parody or a pastiche of wearing another person's face.
Yes, correct. Yes, I think there are ways to look at this. I know, kind of in some of the newer versions, literally we see the process of him taking off someone's face and literally wearing it. So there is a lot that goes with it. But yes, it does add to that. And like I said, the guy is just so big that depicts Leatherface. He just goes up with this hammer and he just smacks Kirk right in the face. And he's just out like that. And you don't really see, it's not super gory. There definitely is blood, but he's totally out of it. And you just kind of see Kirk, and you just see him kind of shaking on the ground, right? And then you see Leatherface, he just goes once again, and he just sits there, smacks him in the head again, right? And you just see him take him off. And that to me was just it's all just so abrupt. It's not drawn out. It's not some long-winded thing. You don't hear him screaming. It's just a quick knock in the face and then a second one to finish the job. A super quick death. So when this happens, right, you have Pam that's also outside. So she goes into the house when Kirk is not responding, and you start to see a little bit of the house. And I think the house plays a really good setting, and I almost consider it to be another character in this movie, because it does kind of help display everything that's going on. So you start to see some of the house, and you start to see like the bones of animal and of people that's like pretty much decorating this house. You got furniture, like, you know, I guess Ed Gein was the was the interior decorator for this place. Because you got all these bones and everything, and I just kind of laughed when I saw there's a chicken in a cage, right? So you see all these dead bones, all these things, all these weird furniture. You see a chicken in the cage. And the only thing I think this whole time is like, man, I would love to know what that chicken is seeing, because that chicken's seen some shit, right? If that chicken can talk, I would just love to know what that chicken is seeing in that house, because I'm sure it's seen some shit that we would all squirm at. We see Pam, like I said, in the house, venturing around the house. And then, you know, we have Leatherface come out. He kind of grabs her, and he just brings her into the kitchen, and you see these giant meat hooks there, and you just see him, he just throws her on there like a slab of meat, right? And that always got to me. And like I said, it's not gruesome at all, right? It's gruesome when we think about it, obviously, but its depiction is very withdrawn, right? Like, you don't see like any type of crazy blood. You just see her kind of hooked up, and it's just the disregard that character has for human life is just so unsettling. Like how he just look there and just throw people on this meat hook like they're not a living being. And then you kind of see Leatherface with his infamous chainsaw. This is where we finally see it, right? So I think we always think about him with the chainsaw, but reality is the chainsaw is actually not used a ton in the first movie. I think it becomes a lot more prevalent in the future, but in this, doesn't really have it. So you see him, he starts to cut up Kirk as Pam is just sitting there on the meat hook. And almost she's watching Kirk get pretty much dismembered. Like I said, it's just one of those things that it does such a strong job of just depicting the total ridiculousness that's happening in this. And I think the fact that I could easily see that being something that actually could happen, I think that makes it even scarier, because I can easily see some crazy person that's capable of doing this. And I'm sure, like I said, this is, you know, I'm sure there are unfortunately situations where this has happened. And to me, that just makes it harder to watch, because it is something that I can easily see going down the wrong road, being trapped in some place, and meeting a whole bunch of cannibals that are absolutely crazy.
I mean, especially when you know when she wakes up to see the entire family sitting there, and we see the hitchhiker from earlier, and everybody's just like, I mean, they basically have all lost their shit, you know.
Yes. Yeah. No, I agree. So yeah, so we do eventually get to that, right? So we have, you know, after this whole incident happens, you know, we kind of have our third miscellaneous person, Jerry, that enters the house. Once again, Jerry, without any provocation, he just goes into this house. So, you know, another person that by all definitions is just breaking and entering. You know, he's kind of in the house. And you kind of hear this like weird thud from the freezer. And this is always a part that was really weird to me, is like he goes in there, he sees Pam, and Pam kind of like burst out of the freezer. And I always thought that was kind of weird, because it's like, she must be dead, right? Like, you can't live on a meat hook for very long, right? Like, I feel like she must have like bled out. So I don't know. I always thought that part was weird. I've never experimented with putting someone on meat hook and then putting them in a freezer and seeing how long they live. So I guess maybe someone that has done that could maybe explain in the comments how that works. Like, right. I'm thinking maybe in the freezer, like maybe like she's frozen, so maybe that like clots her blood or something. I don't know, but I feel like there's no way she would have had any type of reaction. So I think that was just kind of a cheap thing. But once again, you know, Leatherface comes in, sees Jerry now in there, and Jerry meets the hammer, and Jerry's out of it, right? So we got 3 of our 5 characters dead. And this really leads to kind of the final part, where I think we start to meet the cast of characters, right? Where we actually see some of this other stuff that's been going on, and we kind of understand that the depravity goes a lot more outside of just Leatherface. So we got Sally, the final girl, and we got Franklin, who's been chilling at the van, or both of them been chilling at the van. So, both of them, they can't leave because I believe Jerry took the keys with them. So they're at this van that they can't do anything with. And like I said, it's in the middle of the night, right? So this is where, you start to get a lot more of that tension because everything's been happening during the day. Now we're at night. So it kind of adds that extra emphasis of like the whole situation being just totally, how would I put it? It's just the feeling that everything is going wrong is just pouring over you at this stage. So they're going through trying to see if they can, find this creek and, find this house. So, Leatherface comes out as they're traveling, and poor Franklin never stood a chance, right? I mean, this guy's wheelchair bound. I don't think anyone was ever thinking that, oh yeah, the guy that's wheelchair bound, he's going to survive through this, right? He meets his fate right there. And like I said, Sally ends up, running to the house. And then we get to see a little bit more of the house. And I think one of the things that's even creepier now is she goes up to kind of the upstairs part, and she goes into a room, and you see what I would describe as two corpses, right? You see this lady and you see this man, and they're by all definitions, I mean, they look totally rotten.
Not forget like were they stuffed or were they just like desiccated?
They were desiccated, and here's the thing, and I will tell you in a moment. I won't go into it yet, but these bodies are totally desiccated, so that's
Okay.
great call out, and that's what makes the next part even creepier to me, right? So I'll get to that in a moment, but that's a great call out, right? So she finds these two like very much desiccated bodies, and like I said, Leatherface is chasing after her, and I love how Sally is just like, she sees the window, she just jumps out of it, right? And this is on the second floor. Like, she's not jumping on the first floor, right? She's on the second floor. She just hucks it out the window, right? So I absolutely love that with Sally's character, because I feel like so many times you see like characters when like the slash is coming out of them and they're always like trying to like, oh, this door is locked, or I don't want to like, they sit there and pause and be like, I don't know if I want to do this. Sally's like, hell the fuck no, right? I'm jumping out this window, and she just yeets it out of here. So she jumps out the window, and unfortunately, she does, I think, kind of get a little bit injured. Leatherface ends up, grabbing her and takes her back into the house, where Sally gets to experience, Sally, I apologize. So Sally actually is able to escape initially, and then that's when she goes back to the gas station. She was out earlier, where we find out that the gas station attendant is actually a part of this really weird family. Right. So Sally, we think that she's going to make it because she got to this place of safety, just to find out that, well, unfortunately, it's not really safe there for you, Sally. He pretty much kidnaps her and brings her back to the household, where we have the most uncomfortable dinner scene I've ever seen in a movie, where Sally is tied up in a chair. You get to meet the hitchhiker from earlier, the gas station attendant, who is also having dinner with them, Leatherface, and then, believe it or not, one of the bodies that was totally desiccated upstairs, that is, I'm guessing the patriarch of the family, the grandfather, he was still alive. And that part was like, my jaw hit the ground. Because I'm like, I thought they were just going to wheel them out and they just kind of like bring the dead bodies to, the dinner table because, they're all family or something, right? That's what I'm expecting. And then, you kind of see Sally gets cut on her finger, and then you see they bring her finger, the cut finger, over to the grandfather's face, and he just starts sucking on her finger and sucking her blood. I'm like, holy shit. Like, I don't like, are they like, how could he be alive? Like, is this some type of like weird voodoo magic? Like, I have no idea what's going on.
Yeah, that scene, that was the one scene in the movie that I found really, really disturbing. It wasn't Leatherface knocking all these people out and killing them. I mean, it wasn't even the crazy hitchhiker. It was that scene. I was like,
Oh yes.
This is too messed up.
Yeah, this is where, like I said, it's been a very, like, it just keeps upping the ante, where it's just like, okay, once I feel like I see Leatherface cutting people up, I feel like that's the end. And then it just kind of fools you, and then it's like, nope, it's gonna get even weirder. So then you have her at this dinner table. I like how Leatherface has like makeup on now, so he has like blush on and everything. And I'm like, okay,
Oh, yeah.
this just makes it even that much weirder because you got this giant guy that's wearing makeup here. And like I said, they kind of bring Sally over and they're trying to have the grandfather kill Sally. And I have to admit, I kind of laughed at this stage. Like, it kind of breaks some of the tension just because of how absurd it is. Because it's just like, okay, like this guy, I don't know how he's living, but he definitely is not going to be able to do anything. And you can see he can't even really grip the hammer or do anything. He's pretty much totally out of it. So I have to admit, there is a part that's just like so utterly absurd that it just kind of breaks everything for me. But like I said, this is the moment where Sally is able to escape as she's untied to have the grandfather, supposedly try to kill her, which fails. She's able to escape. She makes it to like a truck and she drives away with Leatherface in chase. And that's how the movie wraps up. And, I think overall for me, I think it's just, there's just so much like kind of disturbing imagery in it that I think really kind of gets to you. You start to see like just how nonchalant everything is. I think the absolute callousness of Leatherface also really does it for me because it's just like he does these things and there's just no sense of care in the world for what's going on. Like, this is just a Tuesday for him. He's like, well, there's some people in here. Let me just smack them around. And like I said, now, I kind of look at that like, oh, cool. We got dinner for a few weeks or months, or I don't know. I'm not a cannibal. I don't know how long it takes to eat a bunch of people. But I'm sure they have food for a while. Right. And as he pointed out, like that dinner scene was just like, oh man, like just going through your head all the terrible things that they're probably going to do to poor Sally. You're just thinking about like, oh man, like they're there, like she's tied up, she's got no chance. They're going to like, start cutting pieces off of her or something. Like, it's just, your mind is just filled with all these terrible thoughts because you see how depraved this family is. And I think that sense of hopelessness is just like, so like you just kind of start to like kind of squirm away. But like I said, it was just such a really well done thing. And as she escapes, like you really breathe that sigh of relief that she made it. But I think for this movie, right, it just did so much, right? This is kind of like before, all those slasher films that start to come up, right? I think Halloween's probably the next one. It comes out in 78. And then obviously, you have Friday the 13th, you have Freddy later on. But I think the Texas Chainsaw Massacre really kind of helps set that up. And like I said, while it's definitely not my favorite film, I would be lying if I didn't see its impact that it had on the genre. And it's certainly, even nowadays, almost 50 years later, still gives that sense of unease that I would like to see in horror films. And like I said, it doesn't rely on jump scares to do that. It's just the building of atmosphere makes you feel so heavy with everything going on.
Well, not to mention too the fact that I mean, I don't think before horror films ever delved into cannibalism the way that the Texas Chainsaw Massacre did. So this kind of like set the stage for for sort of this crazed cannibal family motif to kind of make its way into modern filmmaking.
Absolutely right. It was new to the palette, and I think the new to the movie palette. And I realize it's probably not a good idea to use palette when we're talking about cannibals, but you know what I mean.
Well, it's Halloween, so
yeah, sure, we could be more macabre than this. So, but yeah, like it was just something very new to, I think, audiences at the time. And I know initially it was met with very mixed, even I would say negative reviews with it. Now, and I would say, like some of the movies on my list, I think a lot of people come around to this being, like I said, not like an impeccable movie, not a perfect movie, but definitely a movie that brought a lot to the genre.
I mean, compared to to the modern remakes and reboots that you see in subsequent years, I mean, this one, I mean, I mean, none of them can hold a candle to the original, just because the original, like you said, I mean, was very, it was the things that it did were very new, but were very, very jarring, and they didn't rely on jump scares or anything. It was just, it was just a very quick action that occurred, and then you moved on to the next scene. It didn't
Yeah,
kind of.
it was very matter of fact. I think that's why I look at it. It was very matter of fact. Like they were just sitting there doing it. Nowadays, like, we just stress on it. It's like, oh, cool, we're gonna watch someone getting their, leg chainsawed off, or like I said, we're just gonna watch someone like get pierced with the meat hook, and you're gonna see the meat hook come out of it, and they're trying to get out of it. Like it just like I think they increase kind of the goriness and just kind of the savagery of it. But I think sometimes just it being very simple, I think could have just as strong of an impact.
Gotcha. So that's number 5 for you,
Yes.
Texas Chainsaw Massacre. All right. So for me, the my number 5 choice is going to be Nosferatu the Vampire. And that's the one that was directed by Werner Herzog, and that was released in 1979. Now I'm gonna try to keep mine a bit more concise in my approach, but what I really liked about this movie was the fact that was one, you had Klaus Kinski, who was a very, I mean, what's the right word? A very temperamental actor, to say the least. He'd been in other Herzog movies like, Aguirre, The Wrath of God, Fitzcarraldo, all those great movies. But his performance in Nosferatu, the Vampire, is just, it was very haunting. It was one of those movies that I've only seen once, but it's just stuck with me the entire time. Now, for now for those of you who aren't aware of Nosferatu, this one's basically a remake of the silent horror film that was made, I think, like in the 1920s. I know it was after World War One. That was the one starring Max Schreck, and even then, that was an unauthorized film adaptation of Dracula by Bram Stoker. Um, what I really, I mean, for me, I like to approach this more from a technical standpoint. The way that the way that Klaus Kinski was made up to look like Nosferatu was just, it was just downright demonic, to say the least. His his approach to the character, I mean, he already had a reputation for playing very um very dark and obsessive characters. So playing Nosferatu was pretty much a walk in the park for him. Now, for anybody who's familiar with the Dracula story, obviously it starts off with Dracula, wanting to come to England, or in Nosferatu's case, Germany, and what basically happens is he meets up with an estate agent who'll be trapped in his castle, and then he goes over to England or Germany, meets with, he integrates himself into modern society, seduces his estate agent's fiance, tries to have his way with her, but then the heroes show up and dispatch the vampire, and everybody's safe. Not in this case, because what happens is, and what I think what Herzog does brilliantly is he makes you focus on what's going on with the vampire, but he never, he, but he never really puts much emphasis on what happens with Jonathan Harker, or the estate agent in Nosferatu, and yeah, I mean, the vampire does get killed in the end, but then what happens to the estate agent is he becomes the next vampire. And you would think that, with the Van Helsing character having dispatched the vampire, he would be deemed a hero. No, he pretty much gets arrested and taken off to jail. And then
Damn.
Harker, as the new vampire, he goes off to continue his, I guess, quote unquote, master's legacy. Um, by by continuing on with his vampire ways. So that's so for me that so for me that twist, the twist before M. Night Shyamalan took it and butchered it to death. I thought that was brilliant. Not to mention the fact that there were two versions of this movie that were made in '79. There was a German version and an English version. So obviously the English version was used for international markets, and then the German version was used for at the time the West German market. But I think this this is one of Herzog's best films in my opinion, and I think the performance is just spot on. I think the twist at the end, it definitely departed from the Bram Stoker source quite significantly, but it remained faithful to the general structure of it while trying to make it its own. So for me, number 5 is going to be Nosferatu the Vampire.